So a big part of many people's resentment against EA has to do with the company's notorious history of taking studios that have a lot of potential, taking their franchises and just killing them outright by making poor decisions surrounding its business model, whatever it may be, and then they will essentially absorb the contents of that studio, spit out the shell, keep the IPs for themselves, but in turn ruin the IP and essentially just undo the teams that actually made these IPs what they are today. And chief among those IPs, the beloved IPs, is Dead Space. This is a series that I actually grew up playing, and Dead Space 1 and 2 in particular are highly regarded, with 3 seen as more of a black sheep, and many consider 3 to be the game that essentially killed the franchise because EA forced microtransactions among other factors. And so we haven't heard from that series in a very long time. But apparently, there may be hope yet for the Dead Space IP, as it was reported by Video Games Chronicle that EA will reportedly announce an established IP revival next month. And this is echoing information shared by GamesBeat journalist Jeff Grubb, who said that we are going to see this revival IP shown during EA's Play event on July 22nd. And Jeff Grubb seemingly knows exactly what this IP is, but isn't leaking that just to keep it a surprise. But he dropped a pretty big hint when he said, "We are going to see it if we're not dead first," which many have interpreted as meaning that Jeff Grubb is wink wink nudging Dead Space revival. And EA Motive is the studio that's going to be helming this. And EA Motive, for those who don't know, helped out with Star Wars Battlefront 2 and most recently released Star Wars Squadrons, which was generally met with overall, I'd say, positive impressions. And the business model of that game was very consumer-friendly. $40, no microtransactions, free content that was added post-launch. Now, it isn't just Jeff Grubb who is saying this. News outlet Eurogamer corroborated this by echoing what Video Games Chronicle reported, and then saying which tallies with information we have also heard. And then the article details how Dead Space 3 launched to lukewarm reception. Its addition of co-op, which completely changed the way the creepy sci-fi survival horror series played, was blamed on EA by fans at the time. Definitely the more action-oriented gameplay of Dead Space 3 was less well received than the more horror and atmosphere-centric Dead Space 1 and 2. But what really, I think, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way was that Dead Space 3 included microtransactions. It was, in a lot of ways, one of the progenitors of modern-day microtransactions. And basically, it allowed people to buy the currency that would allow them to craft and upgrade weapon components. And many people felt as though the game was artificially designed in such a way that resources are doled out at a rate that would strong-arm people into making those microtransactions purchases, because the in-game grind would be slowed down or would be just more insufferable than it otherwise would have been. It was reported that Dead Space 3 wasn't originally designed for microtransactions, but EA obviously interfered and said, let's get this business model in there. And rumor also has it that, EA was the one behind the more action-oriented gameplay style of Dead Space 3 when the team wanted to go back to one's more horror-centric approach, because EA thought, it just wasn't marketable to sell a game like the original Dead Space, which was a successful game. Just a lot of baffling decisions surrounding Dead Space that ultimately killed the franchise. And what really deprived Dead Space fans of hope was when EA shut down Visceral Games, which is the studio behind the Dead Space series. EA not only killed Dead Space, but with it, they killed Visceral after Dead Space 3's failure because of EA's leadership decisions surrounding it. Visceral was relegated to titles like Battlefield Hardline. This was a genre of game that Visceral didn't specialize in, but they were forced to make this. It didn't do all that well. And recall that Visceral was also working on Project Ragtag, the story-driven linear action-adventure Star Wars game spearheaded by Amy Hennig that was canceled following the shutdown of Visceral Games, and Patrick Soderlund, EA CFO, said this: "We have been testing the game concept with players, listening to the feedback about what and how they want to play, and closely tracking fundamental shifts in the marketplace. It has become clear that to deliver an experience that players will want to come back to and enjoy for a long time to come, we needed to pivot the design," which basically translates to we can't monetize single-player linear story-driven games as much as we can monetize live services, so we're going to turn this into live services and pretend that people don't like single-player games anymore and all they want is live services. Just the same type of BS EA has been spouting over the last few years. But yeah, with the death of Visceral, people lost hope that Dead Space would see any kind of comeback, though that may change in the not-so-distant future, and we'll find out on July 22nd. Though my main concern is that ultimately we're not looking at even the same team, the same developers, or the same creators of the Dead Space franchise. The Visceral team has largely been disassembled, and the creator of Dead Space is actually working on his own sci-fi horror game called the Callisto Protocol, which was announced back in the Game Awards 2020. The footage of that looks something like this. This is just a cinematic trailer, so we can't really glean at gameplay, but you can already very much see that this is a signature Dead Space creator type of game, and it certainly gives off that really strong atmosphere that hopefully will carry over when we actually see gameplay. But Glenn Schofield is the name of the Dead Space creator, and he is no longer involved with EA. He's working on Callisto Protocol. I'm actually really looking forward to this, given Glenn Schofield's track record with the Dead Space series, and just what a seminal game that was for the horror genre. He went over to the folks who publish PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, PUBG Corp, now known as Krafton, and basically said, you know, I'll give you a game studio. That's what he apparently told the publisher, and here's the game I'd like to make. And they said, you know what? Go ahead and make the game you want. They gave him the okay, and they've largely left him alone over the past 18 months to create that studio and develop its debut game. So the reason I bring this up is because if the Dead Space revival doesn't end up panning out, at least there is this to look forward to: what is essentially a spiritual successor to Dead Space. But I'm still hoping that the Dead Space revival goes well. Hopefully the folks at EA Motive understand what makes the series special, lean towards that atmospheric horror aspect rather than Dead Space 3's more action-centric direction. And no microtransactions. Do not pull another Dead Space 3. Do not ruin the game design and the progression rate and all of these things by implementing monetization systems that simply don't belong in a game like this. You want to keep players immersed and, fully invested in the horror experience, then don't allow them to swipe their credit card to get free upgrades that can ruin the progression and that pacing, as microtransactions often tend to do. Now, EA Motive did release Star Wars Squadrons, had no microtransactions whatsoever. In terms of business model, it was pretty consumer-friendly, and EA greenlit it. So the hope is that EA will apply a similar mindset to this new Dead Space game, especially after seeing the successes of microtransactions-free titles like Jedi Fallen Order on top of Squadrons. It is absolutely possible to succeed with those kinds of experiences if you deliver a compelling product. There is a place in the industry for those, so do not live service-fy Dead Space. Do not microtransactions-fy Dead Space. Go back to what made Dead Space 1 so special and just enhance everything. That's the best approach that I'm hoping for. But until I see some gameplay footage indicating that this development team understand Dead Space and are really trying to live up to that series' legacy, the Callisto Protocol is kind of where more of my interest is at as far as sci-fi horror games go, given this is just straight up from the Dead Space creator, and hopefully that will work out. Do keep in mind, though, we are in rumors and speculation territory. There hasn't been any official confirmation that a Dead Space revival is happening, so it may turn out that this is not even happening at all, though if sources are starting to line up like this, it tends to mean that at the very least, it's a rumor worth keeping an eye on. Though I guess we'll find out on July 22nd, and if Dead Space is presented there, hopefully they'll show more than a cinematic, and hopefully what we are shown will give us some optimism about the future of the series. But until we find out more about what this Dead Space revival could entail, let me know in the comments below what you think about this potential revival. Do you think it's true that this will happen? And if it is true, What are your hopes and dreams for it? Are you more optimistic? Are you more pessimistic? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.